All right, I think we will get started here. I know people are still flowing in, so great to see you all virtually. My name is Henry Bartholomay. I'm a Senior Policy Manager at the Bay Area Council. Really excited to be bringing the third webinar of the year in partnership with Pearson through our Building the Future of California Talent series. We have some really great panelists with us today. I will introduce them in a second, but first, I know we're all pretty familiar with Zoom at this point. We're very familiar with Zoom at this point, but just a few housekeeping items. If you're in the audience, the Q&A function is at the bottom of the screen. You can submit your questions throughout the webinar. We're going to try, we always save some time at the end of the discussion to get into the audience Q&A section. So we will try to answer as many of those at the end of the webinar session, but please submit them throughout. We encourage that, and we will kind of circle back to the first ones at the end of the webinar session. So just to set the stage a little bit for the discussion today, even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, employers were facing talent shortages, especially high demand frontline workers. With the disruptions to the labor market by shutdowns and the increased remote delivery, this has compromised the workforce even further. So many workers, as we know, over the past 6 months or so, as we've kind of eased a little bit out of COVID-19, are not necessarily returning to the same jobs or returning at all. And so that's going to be a central focus of the discussion today. Pearson has been putting together a report that's going to be public soon. And some of the things illuminated from that were, in July 2021, there were nearly 11 million open jobs, the highest rate, which is 6.9% since tracking began in 2000. Why are people not returning? There's a myriad of reasons for that. The CARES Act is one piece of it. Lack of childcare is definitely one that we've all seen, I think, personally, over the course of the last 18 months. And people are placing new values on their time and the assessment of risk with the jobs that they want to take as they return to the workforce. And some of those are the reasons for a slower return to the workforce. This reality further exacerbates the challenges that employers have to fill jobs and to compete with other employers for job seekers to fill them. The response across the board has been filled with incentives from employers, including signing bonuses, extra perks, higher pay. But is that enough to get employees and keep them in the long term? That's what we're going to explore today and hear from some really, leading employers, Melinda at JPMorgan Chase, Erika at Pearson, and Steven at Prologis. And what do employers need to do in order to respond to the changing needs of these workers? So as we usually do at the webinars, I want to hand it off to our panelists to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their background at their company as it relates to workforce development. So we'll start with Erika Webb-Hughes, the Vice President of Sustainability and West Coast Government Affairs at Pearson. Go ahead, Erika.
Thanks, Henry. Hi, everyone. We're so glad that you're here to join us today. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. As Henry said, I lead sustainability at Pearson as well as the West Coast Government Affairs, but my heart and my soul has always been in education. I have a 20-year-long career in education as a teacher myself, and also at the state level working at the Department of Education here in California on policy issues, and now at Pearson. And we are incredibly focused on this huge transition that everyone is making right now as we look at the world of learning and work differently and how we're using technology and potentially digital tools to help us do that better. And COVID's only put a spotlight on that. So I think we'll hear more about this and other things in this conversation. And I'd love to pitch it over to my colleague, Melinda, to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Erika. My name is Melinda Yee Franklin. I'm the West Region Executive for Community Engagement and Corporate Responsibility at JPMorgan Chase, based in San Francisco, although today I'm coming to you from New York City. So, huge issue for us as well. We have over 270,000 employees throughout the world. And it's, in the Bay Area, about 3,000 employees, and just so many, challenging issues around workforce, and certainly bringing folks back post-pandemic as well, and just the many issues that we'll talk about today. And certainly the diversity, equity, and inclusion issue is huge for my firm. having made a significant investment in that recently. So lots to talk about today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and I'll turn it over to Stefan.
Thank you. So my name is Steven Hussain. I'm the Vice President of Workforce Programs and Community Relations, as well as Government Relations at Prologis. Some of you might not be familiar with Prologis, but we are the world's leader in industrial logistics real estate. So over 5,000 customers, 2.5% of all global GDP flows through our buildings every single year. But our core business is real estate. Yet our customers' number one pain point, whether that be FedEx, UPS, Amazon, Walmart, their number one pain point is labor and talent, and what that means for the broader supply chain. And of course, we're all seeing the challenges in the supply chain, and a lot of that has to do with available talent and available labor. So we have set a goal that we want to train and upskill 25,000 folks by 2025, and my team helps lead that implementation. In fact, just this morning, we announced expansion into 15 US cities with our program. So excited for that, and excited for this conversation.
Well, thank you all. I'm really excited as well. I've been able to connect with you beforehand and heard a lot of really interesting insights that are going to be prevalent in this discussion. I think to kick things off, Erika, I'd love to start with you, and if you could tell us a little bit about where the motivation came from to produce this report on the frontline workforce and the importance of upskilling and career pathways. And then can you tell us a bit about what Pearson is noticing about its own workforce as it relates to what you found in the study that's coming out shortly?
Yeah, and I'll try to do that very quickly and succinctly. That's a lot of information. So what happened was we, about 18 months ago, which was an interesting time for all of us, but we didn't know what we know now about how much we were looking at our team, which is called Accelerated Pathways. And that is a team within Pearson who works with employers to help upskill frontline workers, especially in hospitality, retail, IT, and healthcare within their own organizations, but providing them that wraparound support of content, curriculum, English language development, et cetera, to help really ramp up what they're doing in talent and development. And we were looking together at, wow, we really have this talent shortage, especially as it relates to those key industry areas. And how is we as a provider of learning and content, how do we play in this to help solve this problem with our employer partners? Let's go out and study what's happening and what creates the on-ramp for good programming, and what does great look like in not just skilling up people, but how does that translate into retention of talent? Because what our employers were also telling us is that they were upskilling people, but then they were leaving. And so they were still dealing with an attrition problem once they got people in the door. So we started this journey with SPR, a leading research firm that we work with often. And our goals were to identify successful employee upskilling programs and strategies that actually work, and then establish a best-in-class scorecard that could help organizations consider creating or improving, maturing their upskilling initiatives of their own. And then we also wanted to benchmark one of our current clients against that scorecard and help them to create a continuous improvement program. And so we did that. And we'll be sharing more details of that research as we publish that in the next week or two. But what we learned from that is, one, yes, there are definitely tenets to what best looks like. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But one of the reasons we really benefited from learning about that is our own workforce. Pearson sits in that strange nexus between not only being a large global employer, but also being one that's focuses on learning and education. And so we are able to look at both of those things as not only the what we do, but who we are. And we were also seeing this retention issue of talent coming in the door, getting people in and retaining them and being able to train them well. So we're actually using it to apply to ourselves and improve our own process internally to create less pain and less attrition as people are looking for different things in the workforce, as now being in a, I won't say post-COVID world, but an in-COVID world. We're all looking to do things better and more in a balanced way that meets the needs of our employees and also employers.
That transitions very well into our next question. On the retraining piece of it, I would say JPMorgan Chase has been a long leader in workforce development investment, and specifically with an eye towards the importance of retraining the workforce as our economy changes in the 21st century. Melinda, could you tell us a little bit about what JPMorgan Chase has learned from its investments, and specifically kind of what your top line priorities are after the past, I guess it's 18 months, I keep mixing up 18 and 19 months, but the past year and a half or so that we've been going through, which has been incredibly turbulent on a lot of fronts.
Yeah, and agree with Erika. We want to say post-pandemic, but it's in the midst of it together, right? So certainly, Henry, thank you for your question. And certainly with Steven and Erika, we're figuring out all these challenging issues, focusing on diversifying our own talent pipeline by incorporating diversity in how we recruit, train, and develop employees. I mentioned previously that we've made a $30 billion commitment to racial equity in general, and the employee piece is certainly a significant component to that. And then in a couple questions later, I'm really going to delve a little bit more into that. But for instance, in 2020, we hired approximately 2,100 individuals with previously incarcerated individuals, people with some challenges from their past, what we call second chance. And approximately 10% of our new hires in the US were people in that category. And to better connect adults and young people to well-paying jobs in a transformed economy and labor market, education and training systems need to adapt and innovate to meet current and future skill demands. So what does that mean, and what's an example of that? And I wanted to give an example that hits home that we're doing here in the Bay Area. The Fellowship Initiative launched in Oakland this past February. And that's a program that's key to continuing to help prepare and guide young men of color and the future leaders of our society. Over the past decade, TFI, that this is known as the Fellowship Initiative, has matched more than 350 high school fellows in New York, Chicago, Dallas, and Los Angeles with JPMorgan Chase employees who serve as mentors for 3 years. We say 3 years, but that's really for a lifetime. I've met many of these mentors, and the stories are incredibly inspiring. The program has contributed to a 100% admission rate to colleges among graduating fellows, with more than half of the fellows being the first in their family to attend college. And to really be people who really wouldn't have an opportunity like this otherwise. We continue to expand programs to additional US cities and are committed to to participants who are listening in today. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Henry.
Those are some incredible stats. I mean, 100% admission into college is really, wow. Thank you for sharing some really specific examples here in the Bay Area, Melinda. I think it's a great hearing about JPMorgan Chase, and then kind of shifting gears and thinking a little bit about the view of Prologis and how the logistics industry over the past 18 months has become like something that everybody's thinking about. We're ordering our packages on Amazon. I mean, that's the big one, but there's FedEx, UPS, and all the different companies that are part of it. It's a huge workforce. So Prologis brings a really important perspective. During the pandemic, with all of the goods being shifted to ordering online, people becoming more and more dependent on the logistics industry and its workforce, what have you seen as the most important changes over the past 18 months in the logistics industry, specifically thinking about how expectations from workers have changed? I mean, I know that there's been a huge shift, I think, in the national conversation around that, Steven.
Yeah, I mean, even before the pandemic, actually well before the pandemic, our customers' number one pain point was talent. And that had been consistent for several years. And the reason for that is, one, the industry has been growing fast well before the pandemic, right? People were already shifting to e-commerce, and that fundamentally changes the way the supply chain works, which has a lot of ripple effects in the broader workforce. That was obviously exasperated by the pandemic and the need to change the way that we shop and get our goods delivered, change the way people were consuming goods and what they were consuming, change global commerce fundamentally, right? There's a lot that happened during the pandemic. But I think the key here is it had to change the conversation between employers and employees about what expectations were. And that's really been the conversation over the last 18 months is how do they balance the needs of their workforce while also getting the needs of production done? And that's a tricky conversation. And it's happening at the same time as the industry is still growing. So, it's interesting when you look at our data, there was never a slowdown in our business. There was never a slowdown in our customers' business. It just kept growing and growing and growing. In fact, demand right now is greater than it has ever been. So that's real signal of the challenges that you face. It's also, I think, a bigger conversation, Henry, about people were having to reposition. So you talk about a hospitality workforce that might be repositioning, or a traditional retail workforce that might be repositioning. Switching from traditional retail to working in a logistics facility is quite a switch. And it takes time to get people retooled and to shift the labor force to get prepared for that. But I think there's an ongoing conversation about expectations of what employees expect from employers in terms of education, training, career pathways, benefits, services, and that is not going to shift in the near term. That is, I think, the new working reality for employers.
Thank you. Yeah, there's so many pieces of that we can dig in on. I think we will get there as we're going forward. But before we do that and kind of look at the macro view, for all of you, looking more internally at your own companies, what have you been doing to retain its own workforce in the midst of a huge transition on many fronts? I mean, there's the move to remote work is the big part of that, and the increased burdens of childcare and students at home. I would imagine that that's had impacts at all of your companies in some form or another. What have you been doing to retain your own workforce? What's been working? And are there any upskilling or retraining efforts that are underway that have been showing promise for your existing workforce? And we can start with you, Erika. And as always, I encourage, as you're having thoughts, please jump in and add more as other panelists, because I think these are interesting questions for discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's happened in the last year and a half has been just a monumental shift in the way that we all perceive the way work is done and where it can be done. And so what Pearson did was, within a week after the announcements in March of 2020, moved an entire workforce that was about, I think the estimate is about 15% remote work, but mostly in office, for the rest of the workforce of about 25,000 people. In 1 week, transitioned everyone to remote work around the world, with the exceptions of a few very small pockets of the company. And then we saw over the next year how incredibly effective our team could be in that environment for the most case, with proper support, proper reaching out from employee resource groups and teams, leadership and HR, to ensure that technology was working for people, that people understood working in that environment, that they had other supports when potentially working parents were now home with also trying to accommodate a work schedule with being a parent. And, we've talked ad nauseum about the challenges that had this last year. But what we learned was, what it gave us the opportunity to do was resource talent differently, and also have a more one-on-one relationship with all of our employees through quarterly surveys that we do on, culture, the employee engagement, leadership, practices and processes across the company, and how we are approaching our recruitment strategy and retention strategy. So what we started this year was a new commitment to diverse recruitment, promotion, and retention. And we're establishing a new strategy to attract a much more diverse pool that now we can in a remote world, where instead of having to look specifically at one market, one region of the world for talent, we can actually open that up and seek out talent much more broadly, which is good for so many reasons. We're improving our functional plans to improve gender and BIPOC and BAME representation at all leadership levels. So we took a deep dive into that and where we needed to see improvements. So we're building those plans. We're also strengthening the process we have for diverse advancement within the company and our talent and development program, which creates a new opportunity for people to go from entry-level positions up through into leadership more effectively, with better mentoring and sponsorship programs with key leaders across the business. We're also looking at our fair pay and compensation structures to make sure that those reflect the regions of the world that we work in, and also the new dynamic of the work that we're doing, likely more flexibly in a hybrid model, heavily remote. What else are we doing? There's a couple things here that I wanted to make sure. Oh, one really important thing that we've leveraged more in the recent 18 months than we ever have is our employee resource groups. We've expanded them. We've also utilized them more to really be in connection with our people. And that has really created a sense of employee engagement and connection across the company while being remote, which is hard because people sometimes get their connection around the traditional water cooler conversations in an office. Our employee resource groups have really been able to create engagement opportunities and connectedness that wasn't happening, which really helps with the feeling of being isolated at home or alone or not as much part of a team. That has really seen some really incredible engagement. So those are a couple of the key things that we're doing. There's more to mention, but I'm going to let my friends talk too. So let's see, let's just keep it in order. Want to pitch it over to Melinda? I'm sure you've got some great details to share about JPMorgan.
Well, I can say I should echo everything you said, Erika, because completely agree with you. Certainly, my firm believes we have the responsibility to harness our business and policy expertise, our research, data, talent, global presence to help create greater opportunity for more people, whether they're employees or externally. Certainly, we've been developing a lot of programming, content, training to support, I would say I like to be global and think of society as a whole. And you mentioned the BRGs, the business resource groups. We have executive leadership groups, business resource groups, over 10 now. I work closely with many of the communities of color, as well as the veterans group and our accessibility group. For the Asian American group, I'm going to give you a very specific example of how that really helped a lot of us. I had recently joined the firm. I've only been with JP since January of this year. And, with COVID, the rise in anti-Asian violence, which we're all aware of, lots in the Bay Area, certainly many cases, and I'm here in New York, also a center of activity. The business resource group really was instrumental in bringing these conscious conversations together, a safe space, doing programs that educated the broader community of JPMorgan Chase, having guest speakers, and to really be that place where it was all on Zoom, of course, but that people could feel like, wow, I'm supported, people care, we're actually doing some tangible work here. We ended up in a very short turnaround time donating $1 million to three different key organizations across the country. Stop Asian Hate was one of them, that's based in San Francisco. We just felt the need to really be out there on that issue because it was such an important part of our community and our workforce. And similar, obviously, with the Black community, Hispanic community, Black community following George Floyd's murder, a lot of work around that as well. So it's just been a place for us, again, as you said, Erika, to feel safe and supported. And that's something that, personally, I talk about it, I'll probably get emotional. It's just something that is so important to us. I've spent a lot of time with our military friends as well who are in the firm. In fact, just yesterday, one of the leads there who just got back from Haiti and was posted in Afghanistan came in to give us a briefing. And those are the kind of things that, really matter to our workforce and again, the community at large. So I just encourage, again, the participants on the call today to really dig deep in this area, because I think, especially as we're all remote and starting to come back, to be there for our fellow employees. I'm a big fan of return to the office, but in a safe and secure way. I spoke to one of the senior representatives in City Hall recently who just asked me, what does it look like? We're at 560 Mission in San Francisco. And I said, it's still a little sparse there, but we're still coming back about 50% of the time. But part of it is just to be together and just to be able to work through the issues that we're collectively facing during the pandemic and figure out ways to move forward. So it's all part of that same equation to support each other.
Yeah, for us, very different size company than Pearson and JP in terms of number of employees, but we were a global company. In fact, we have an office in Wuhan, China, so we saw this very, very early on. And for us, first and foremost, prioritize employees, right? That was the first thing we did. That was the first approach that we took. And that meant implementing flexible scheduling very quickly because we recognized people had children at home, implementing dollars and financial resources for childcare support, again, recognizing that was going to be a real challenge for many of our employees, and empowering all of our frontline leaders to say, what's going to work for your teams and what your teams need to be successful and make that happen. We were really fortunate, one, that we have an incredible IT team, really, really advanced and sophisticated IT team. So we were well equipped to go remote quickly. And I say the long-term effect here, though, is that we are absolutely a more agile organization. We can move much, much faster, I think, than we actually could 18 months ago because the way we make decisions has changed. And we won't go back to operating in the same way that we were operating before. We won't go back to a full return to work. And we're also much more open to our talent pools being expanded. So we have big hubs in Denver and San Francisco. And I think you'll see our employee recruitment go well beyond those areas now going forward.
Well, this is all very interesting and really great to hear some of the specific examples you're all sharing. I think kind of zooming out a little bit, thinking about the broader impacts. I mean, I think a lot of this has been touched on in different ways throughout the conversation, but of the last 18 months, I mean, obviously the pandemic has been front of mind for everybody, and there's been a lot of impacts to equity and worse impacts for lower income families. And then in addition to that, I think a reckoning around racial justice. And so those two things have been kind of happening in tandem over the past 18 months. How do you feel the business world is changing its perspective towards workforce development as it relates to equity kind of going forward? I think there's been massive changes in the business world over the past 18 months just around having these conversations, but as it applies to workforce development, how do you see that changing in the business world, or how has it changed already? in the past 18 months. And we can start with Melinda if you want to go. If somebody's jumping to answer the question, you can jump in as well.
Sure, Henry, happy to take on this one. So as you said, the past 18 months, we've seen such incredible turbulence. The racial wealth divide it's a result, as you noted, of centuries of policies and systems that have significantly curtailed opportunity and wealth creation for many people of color. So economic opportunity and access to high-paying, in-demand jobs help put more people on the pathway to prosperity. So as I mentioned, we at JPMorgan Chase have a $30 billion commitment over the next 5 years to provide economic opportunity to underserved communities. Now, this doesn't mean we're just throwing money at the problem. We are infusing this into our lines of business. We all have scorecards. My team, community engagement and corporate responsibility, we're in the thick of what this is looking like and how it touches down locally within our markets. And so part of these efforts include accelerating investment in our employees, building a more diverse and inclusive workforce, as I previously noted. So we're providing financial coaching to our firm internally. Financial health is a huge part of this, both internally and externally, and providing $2 billion in philanthropic capital over the next 5 years as well to drive more inclusivity, to support Black, Latino, other underserved communities. So you'll see that infused in more of the nonprofit space that where we touch down within our different localities. So we're truly committed to this. There's from the top down, from the bottom up. We will be working with many of the folks on the phone, certainly the Bay Area Council, the San Francisco Chamber, many of the key business organizations, to figure out how we can help to pinpoint unique skills, background, professional experiences to help uplift communities and have them grow. And certainly having that value of diversity and inclusion makes all of us stronger together, and it's just not lip service. We're in the heart of doing it, and it's a lot, and I think we're all learning as we go through this process. What's realistic, what's not. Let's see where our numbers are. Let's have this be very data driven. All of this work. So we'll see within the 5 years when our, and I can see us continuing to renew this, but after 5 years where we're at and assess where we need to be. And I'll turn it over back to you, I guess, Henry. Thank you.
Go ahead, Steven.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Melinda hit on here is something that's great and it's important, and it's one of the ways that Prologis is thinking about it, which is how is our core business addressing this, right? Not just our philanthropic arm. How is the core business of Prologis addressing equity and advancement in communities? And that's something that we're taking very seriously. We've been a leader in ESG for a long time, but if you want to see really scaled change, then it has to be integrated within the business, right? The old days of just doling out grants, that's not effective. That's not a real solution to scaled problems. And JPMorgan has been a leader in this for such a long time, and Pearson, that is your business, right? You're in the education business. So there's obviously natural integration, but for us, it's thinking about, how do we advance solar and EV in the logistics industry? That's something that we want to see happen because we want to see a move towards a zero carbon logistics sector. Well, Prologis has the scale to help drive that change. And that's one of the ways that we're thinking about this. We are large enough to be thinking and working on workforce development issues across multiple communities. That's connected to our core business fundamentally. So let's drive change in that direction. And that's what I think the future of this really is. And I think it's what it's going to take to see sustainable change.
That's such an awesome answer. And honestly, I just am sitting here cheering underneath my screen, yes, 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 this is all true. This is all where we need to be headed. And it absolutely aligns with what we're doing at Pearson. You know, we are seeing, like I mentioned before, we're not only in the learning space, that is the business and the core of what we do is help people advance their lives through learning, but we need to do that in a way that creates sustainable business growth for the company. And what a time to be doing that right now, where we've transitioned very heavily from a print-based, heavily carbon-based environment of work, which was textbooks and materials and assessments, to a fully digital company by 2025, which will incredibly reduce that impact, but also put more affordable and accessible learning opportunities into the hands of more people around the world. And the point of that is to create and lift opportunities for people who otherwise wouldn't have them in communities where it's really hard to get access to quality learning. And that is absolutely critical to our mission at Pearson. And it's critical to my mission personally, is to do that work with, with learning that really creates people's view of themselves to be better, to get better, and to then contribute to a world in a different way. And what we call it in our sustainability team is to learn, earn, and take action in the world. And we can do that through a number of ways. You know, right now we're looking at our company creating a new platform that we just launched this August called Pearson Plus, that puts all of our content into one place, that's app-based, that can be accessed from anywhere in the US, from anyone. And the conversation around college being unaffordable is literally changed in overnight with this app, to be able to create content that's accessible to anyone, anywhere, for very little investment. We've also looked at the way we approach how we create accessible programs for people that have disabilities. And so we really have taken on a lot of work and investment in the last few years to ensure that what we're doing, not only for our employees internally, but all of the people who learn using our products, can access them to the best of their ability. And so that is an incredible way that we're creating more equitable opportunity for more people. And by learning, they're hopefully creating that opportunity to come and meet with you at JPMorgan and you at Prologis and earn the right to get in those jobs, and then create their career path moving forward, where they might meet us up again, because we hope to build a lifelong learning relationship with all of our customers. So who knows, we'll see where we get, but this is the plan today.
Henry, you'll remember that it all started here on this panel.
Yes, right?
Absolutely.
Change the world.
I was going to say, you know, it's just inspiring to hear about all these individual efforts at different major companies around the Bay Area that have impacts, you know, globally. Thinking a little bit, you know, the Bay Area Council is a policy organization. So we're always thinking about policy. How does this impact what gets passed in Sacramento or nationally in DC? You know, the workforce ecosystem, the employer plays an incredibly important role. The employer has the job, the employer is able to support people through wages and other supports and benefits and all of that. But it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's connected to so many other parts of our daily lives, transportation system, housing costs, all of that. So as professionals in major businesses, you know, what advice would you have for policymakers when we're thinking about how to affect change so that we're reaching more equitable outcomes for those who are facing barriers within our workforce, or facing cost barriers that are preventing them from being able to earn a living wage or earn a family sustaining job? What sort of advice from the business community here, as we talked about a lot of different issues, do you all have for the policymakers? And I'm going to kick it to you first, Steven, on this one.
Yeah, there's a couple thoughts, and I'm in the thick of government affairs right now, watching a reconciliation package maybe get put together. So it's an interesting time. Nevertheless, first and foremost, I don't think we actually bring the people that we are talking about to the table. And we need to bring them to the table to talk about real policy solutions, to understand what is actually happening, why are they making certain decisions, what will really help them. Right? Too often we prescribe solutions that we think are correct, and we never talk to the people that they are meant or designed for. And I think that would be my first recommendation. The second, I think, as policymakers is to really take a step back and understand that these things are connected. A workforce cannot succeed without transportation, public housing, childcare, basic infrastructure. These things don't live in silos, and yet policy is often made in silos. I'm an expert in transportation, or I'm an expert in healthcare. Well, they're connected. And how is policy prescribed in a way that's going to make sense and connect those things? Because unless you take a whole person approach and basically a whole community approach to these challenges, that they're just not going to be solved. And I think that's what we have seen, over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, I couldn't echo that enough. I think that we were talking about this in prep, like there are so many spokes on the wheel and there's no one spoke that can do this all by themselves. We have to have policymakers understand that they can't push off certain things to employers that they think employers should just handle and figure it out on their own. These are big, big problems that are gnarly, and they need all of us at the table to figure this out. There are, Steven had a couple of really great examples yesterday about, pockets of places that are doing these well, but they're not scalable. We need big scaled solutions and approaches, not one employer off solutions that fit for one particular community. And that's where policymaking really can shine, is by bringing all those people together and making things that make sense for everyone. However, you got to all be in the room. And I love that also about, we can't be talking about frontline workers and how we support them without actually hearing from them and hearing what those challenges actually are that they're dealing with, and not making the assumption from where we each sit in, like, for instance, in this panel where we all sit as providers thinking we know the answers to all of these problems when we don't. We have to have everyone at the table.
Yeah, certainly couldn't agree more. My background is both in the public and the private sector. And the magic happens when everybody's at the table together, along with the nonprofit community, labor, et cetera. So large companies certainly should be aggressively part of the solution, because we can certainly help with giving advice on job planning, skills training, infrastructure, investment, community development, all of these key areas. And we can use, and this is what we're doing at the Chamber, collective resources, capital, and network to scale proven employer solutions that actually work, building on successful models, sharing best practices to maximize impact. I look on something that at the San Francisco Chamber, we have the Safe Streets initiative to really look at, we have a data dashboard, we target certain communities, Union Square, for example, working with the Business Improvement District, as well as the San Francisco Hotel Council, SF Travel, obviously Bay Area Council and SF Chamber, coming together to really figure out, how can we make our streets safer, and what's working in other cities, not only across the country, but around the world. What works for San Francisco specifically? And it's all intertwined with what we said with transportation, infrastructure, housing, affordable housing, small business. How do we put those pieces together? And just so important, as you both just said, of having us all at the table to think creatively and come up with solutions together. So we're open and always happy to participate at those tables to help drive solutions.
Yeah, the truth here is cities and states are going to drive this change. It's not going to come from the federal government. If you're waiting for that, it's going to be a long wait. And there are certainly examples around the country. There's the city of San Antonio just passed a sales tax increase to spend $100 million on workforce education and training. Just a few years ago, they had done the same thing to expand it to universal pre-K, right? So there are models out there across the country that are certainly good examples. And a lot of that work started with the public and private sector coming together with actual residents, actual frontline employees, actual people to come up with meaningful solutions. And I think that is a model that can be replicated, absolutely.
Well, thank you all for answering these questions. We're going to move to the audience Q&A session here. I think we've heard a lot of really great information. I'm going to go from the top quickly here. We got a few great questions here. I think we've heard some about this. The first question from Bill Bankhead. How have your DEI efforts changed in response to COVID impacts? I think we've heard some of this, but I'd love to hear a little bit more from you all. Go ahead, Erika.
Yeah, I think that's true. I've talked a little bit about this already. You know, I think what this did, COVID and the social justice issues we saw over the course of 2020, particularly, just put an incredible spotlight on the fact that this issue itself hasn't been addressed enough, and honestly enough, organization by organization. And so I think what we did was took a really hard look at our business itself, the people that do our business, how we do hiring and retention and promotion, and really started to put measures in place to strengthen those programs to make sure that it's not an afterthought to think about certain things, but it's actually built into the DNA of the process from design throughout. That's one thing. We've also, we hired a chief diversity officer who now is leading all of that work and really driving our strategy to improve not only for our employees, but also the way we're approaching content development and curriculum, because the way you author content is also important, as we're seeing in the conversation, especially in the US, around content and learning and the way history is being told and the voices that get to talk about history and how those have to be representative and balanced. So that is all being looked at, as well as our content editorial strategy as it relates to D&I in a number of ways, not just by race, ethnicity, but upon multiple views, LGBTQ, folk, differently abled, age, all kinds of components are being looked at to ensure that we're being as inclusive as possible with our processes.
Yeah, and I'll just say we've doubled, tripled, quadrupled down on all these initiatives that previously I outlined. Our chief diversity officer is heavily involved in all of this work. And what's cool is we also have fully staffed up teams. We have one entity is called Advancing Black Pathways, who has the leader is a managing director who has a fully staffed up team, similar with other communities, ethnic communities, as well as LGBTQ veterans, as I mentioned. So we have these fully loaded teams that are really looking at different models. They don't try to recreate the wheel, really, internal, external advancement, career opportunities, really different areas that each of these teams lead. And that's been really fantastic. And I think it's really, as I noted before, to infuse what we do in every aspect of our business, so that it's real, it's genuine, that we're going to see results and really make an impact and advance the needle. I think any of us who feel like, that when, as I said, my portfolio is squarely in this area, that to see measurable results is the key. And we're on that path, and it takes a lot, but I think as long as we can do our part and bring other companies together, that's a win, that we're all doing this together as a society.
Great, thank you. And to keep moving through these, to try to get as many as we can, we've got a question from E. Cohen, wondering if the panelists can articulate efforts to hire mid-career folks to fill open positions, folks who might be in their 40s or 50s, countless of whom face ageism and barriers despite their experience and national hiring challenges. Any of you have any examples of that from within your companies?
So I'll go first, but really it's almost switching it back towards the other way about creating, we do a lot of blind resume work to where we're looking at just removing bias from the hiring process in general and looking at knowledge, skills, and attributes and what people's experience is coming into the table before we even see who the candidate is. So I think that's one piece of a very large puzzle of how you recruit and hire, that removes bias, reduces bias, and then also attracts a larger pool of candidates from particular areas that we need them to be recruited from. So for instance, in this particular question, the expertise of a person mid-career in their 40s and 50s actually is quite attractive to me as a hiring manager because of that. So I think it's an asset, but I understand the question and kind of where it's coming from. So for me, it's about that removal of bias and then also opening the funnel to mid-career job seekers in our recruitment process to get more people in the pool of selection.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because I'm in the midst of building my team, and it's I've already made 3 hires. I'm making another 3 before the end of the year. And so I've looked at a lot of resumes in that process. And I totally agree, Erika. When someone has some really deep, vast experience, that's it depends on the job, obviously, in which we're hiring for, but that to me is a strength. It's a huge strength. I know me, and again, it's an individual thing, but I certainly don't think in my lens of my criteria that, oh, that person's in their 40s or 50s. That doesn't even cross my mind. I think it's really important that people create their narrative in a way that's going to put their best face forward, and that whether it be how they write up their resume or their bio or how they access their network, that they are developing champions within their network who are going to say, hey, this is the right person for this job, and we should really give them serious consideration. So I think it works both ways. We as employers need to have open minds of who we're hiring, but also the person who's out there looking needs to create that narrative that is really going to get them in the door and shine and really be able to flourish in their job interview process and land the best opportunities.
Great.
I actually had one more point on that. Do you mind, Henry? I think the issue is that this may be coming from, and E. Cohen, was it? Is yes, you've got these people mid-career that have all this vast experience, but you've got a hiring team that doesn't want to create a benefits and pay package that meets that. They want entry-level pay, but they want the experience. And so they'll hire a younger person to deal with the pay issue. And so to me, I think that's the rub, is really paying people what they're valued, and worth for the role and the experience that they can play in your organization, and not letting that slide to get more younger, less experienced people as it relates to economic benefit. I want to throw that out because I think that's a lot of where the question's coming from.
I think it's a great point. So for our last question, we always like to end on a positive note. So I'm going to give you each 1 minute to answer this question. And the question is, what makes you hopeful going forward? And we start with Steven.
I have seen, I feel like, more movement, particularly from larger companies in the last 3 months towards employee benefits, wages, thinking about career paths than I probably saw in the last 3 years. And to me, that's a great sign of what's to come. People are radically rethinking what work looks like and what employee engagement looks like. And that's going to lead to positive outcomes. So I'm very excited about the future of that.
Erika?
So Henry, I love this question. This is my favorite question of the whole series. Actually, what makes me hopeful about this entire discussion is not only what Steven just said, but really what this next generation is bringing. this next generation of young people that's coming out expects something different from life. They expect something different from their learning opportunities. They expect to have a voice in a different way than previous generations have had in sitting at the table. They expect employers to behave a different way as it relates to job satisfaction and balance. And I really hope that actually turns the tide with some of these long-held issues we have had, and we can all begin to look at how we show up and do work and participate in an economy in a different way. I'm looking at that, Gen Z, like, please bring it and bring it hard to the rest of us so that we can really learn and change and use this opportunity of immense pressure and challenge that we've all experienced around the globe to really build back a better system that works for all people. And that's what I'm hopeful for.
Thanks, Erika. As the mom of a 21-year-old who's a junior at Columbia University and watching how he thinks and how his friends think, I totally get your point. So they are our future, and certainly helps me feel bright and optimistic, and they do think differently for sure. You know, one thing I'll mention is the Salesforce conference is happening now in San Francisco. I just got off a call earlier today on the JPMorgan Chase Healthcare Conference. It's happening in January of 2022. It's the biggest economic driver to the city every year. And it's just, you know, we're coming back. Things are happening. Those kind of opportunities and others create jobs. We were on with the hoteliers and just saying, gosh, you know, please, you know, as long as everything's good with COVID, you know, we'll be welcoming another 5,000 to 8,000 guests, and that's job creation and everything else that comes with that, with the restaurants, with the stores, with bringing back people into the city. So anything we can do to help promote that and to help, to me, it all comes down to job skills and helping people expand and grow. And so that's where I'm coming from. And I feel so much better because when we were doing everything online last year and trying to do these hybrid things, it was really difficult and challenging. And I feel like it's a new beginning, and hope and optimism is on the way.
Well, we couldn't have better parting words than that. So thank you, Erika, Melinda, Steven, for really providing a really interesting and inspiring discussion today. Looking forward to continuing to work with you to solve all these problems we've illuminated today. And thank you to the audience for attending. As always, we record these webinars that will be sent out afterwards. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll send it to those who weren't able to join us today. So thank you all. Thank you from the Bay Area Council, and thank you, Pearson, for the continued support and partnership on this series. So we'll see you all soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks so much.